For most parents, one of the main objectives to parenting is to give our kids more opportunities or maybe even kind of a better upbringing than we had. So, what do we do when our kids don't feel like that's even attainable or possible? When the outlook on life, they just don't see their outlook or their future being better than ours? That could be a dark place to walk through with our kids and even talk to them about why they feel that. But today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in this daily segment, Face in the Dark, Dr. Kathy looks at why some kids might feel this, especially in light of some new studies that are coming out, and how we can kind of live into that and guide our kids well in a moment that seems so pessimistic. So let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, British teenagers believe their generation will have a worse life than their parents. That's according to some new research. Money, jobs, climate crisis, those were all named as primary concerns among the 1,001 teenagers aged 14 to 17 who were interviewed in this study. When asked to imagine their lives at the age of 30, 55% of teenagers said they believed their lives would be worse than the previous generation, while another 34% thought the next generation of children's lives would not be any better. Of those surveyed, 9% said they felt hopeless about their future. Dr. Kathy, why do you think kids are feeling this way right now?
Yeah, this is really interesting. Well, let me first respond to this idea that they assume that they'll be worse off than the previous generation. I don't think they really understand the previous generation. So the first thing I think I'll say is that they have a pie in the sky attitude toward maybe what has happened or is happening. I don't think parents and grandparents have necessarily defined well for our children today what life has been like. So that data is, I think the data is interesting. So the fact that they believe that they'll be worse off concerns me, but what concerns me more is the number who say they're hopeless, because that I don't think has as much to do with a comparison. I believe that one of the problems is how many young people are aware of trauma, even if they haven't experienced any. Their friends have been more vocal and more vulnerable about what's been maybe going on in their family or in a first career or job or a college dorm situation. They've also seen the brokenness on the World Wide Web. And they've seen the ridiculousness of videos they're watching and people they're following on social media. And so they're aware that life is difficult. And I think that causes them to be unsure about themselves in their future. And another reason that they're despairing, another reason that they might think that they're not going to have as good of a life as their parents, is that many of them don't know what to do in the future. And we've talked about that here before. I think it's so important to understand that when many of us were their age, we knew what to do in our future. We knew we were going to be teachers or nurses or doctors or accountants or administrators in an office or truck drivers. There just weren't as many options. There wasn't the identity crisis that we're in right now where kids are confused. And the reality is that because of the speed of change and the amount of tech that's in our world, many of them will have jobs that don't even exist yet. And according to Barna's research, they'll have 7 careers in their lifetime. And so we could say that that's good, that they're entrepreneurship and that they're creative in all those ways. But it makes it hard for them to know with certainty, I am going to be a this, and I'm going to enjoy it. They have less confidence in that than we would have had at their age.
Yeah, I think that's really important for us to understand a little bit of where they're at. I think that especially what you said about trauma is so true. I think that that's just a reality. We've been working really to train kids to, I would say, kind of be more socially or emotionally aware around them, to the people around them. And in that have kind of encouraged them to take on other people's pain, even though it's not their own. And in some times, I think that kind of pushes kids to take on then that feeling of those emotions or those things that never happened to them, but their friends have had it happen to them. So they imagine that it could happen to them as well, even though it hasn't. And it can lead some of them in some places to kind of feel pessimistic about the future, about their outlook on life. What should parents do when their kids do feel pessimistic or have kind of those, I would say maybe quote unquote, kind of depressive thoughts about the outlook on life?
Yeah. Wayne, what if we taught them to be overcomers? And what if we teach them that they have been overcomers? What if we remind them of what happened at church camp when they were 7? Or let's remind them of they didn't pass their first driving test, but they worked on something and they went and they passed it and all is well, and they don't even remember that they didn't pass it, or they don't talk about it anymore, even if they remember it, because maybe they really do. But I think we have to use the word overcomer more often. And we have to teach them that, yeah, life isn't fair and things go badly, but we don't sit down in the valley when that happens and look at all the things that you've chosen to work on that you've improved at. We got to talk about that.
Yeah, I think that we do have to talk about that. And that's one of the things that I find in the New Testament a lot, right? Paul talks a lot about this kind of call for people to understand really the reality of Jesus. And Paul really does a great job, and other New Testament writers too, about inviting us into kind of the sufferings of Christ to also understand what it means to glory in the sufferings of Christ. And he did this a lot to a church. He wrote this a lot to a church that was facing incredible persecution at that time. They were facing death almost every day when they walked out their doors and talked about Jesus. What lessons should we as parents really glean from scripture to then teach our kids to better guide our parenting as we move forward?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I mean, you brought up Paul, so let's talk about and teach about persecution. There are far too many people in America today who think, oh, that happened somewhere else, or that happened a long time ago. But that's actually not true. There is persecution today for people who follow their standards and their convictions. And some of you listening know exactly what I'm talking about, because you've lost promotions because you stood on your values and you didn't behave in a certain way that was expected of you, and you lost out, but you actually won, because not to compromise who you are is such a blessing to your values, your character, and your heartbeat. So let's talk about persecution. Let's get kids ready for it. We've talked about that here before. I hope our listeners often go back and listen to old episodes, because there's so much current stuff that we've talked about. I also think that we could remind ourselves that God creates our family. You know, God ordains the family. You're married to the person you're supposed to be married to according to God's design. Even on the worst day, your wife is the best wife for you. If you're a husband, and you're the best husband. I mean, maybe that's hard for you to hear me say, but I believe that God is in control of all of that. And you do have the kids who you're supposed to have. So I like to say when I'm at an event that you're the perfectly imperfect parent for perfectly imperfect children. And you need to know that in the knowing of your knowing, so that when they drive you nuts, you don't give up. And they need to know that God chose that you would be their dad and you would be their mom. And so that on the day when they just don't like you at all, they're hopefully going to remember in some part of their hearts that but wait, God wanted that mom to be my, I can't even say it because I'm choked up. God wanted my mommy to be my mommy. Like, I think that helps us cover a multitude of sin, and it helps us believe that tomorrow can be better. Another thought quickly would be the daily bread, right? I think we have a tendency in our culture to want everything on a silver platter. And again, I ordered something from Amazon today. And oh my goodness, if you're not careful and disciplined, you could order 100 things from Amazon and it would only take you 5 minutes to do so. And you could justify that you need every single thing that you've ordered, but it's foolish. So what if we teach about the daily bread, and we sacrifice, and we teach our kids why, and how that feels. And that involves boundaries, right? We're going to set boundaries in our family. These are the things we say yes to, and these are the things we say no to. I often ask teenagers, can you imagine playing football with no boundary lines and no referees? Like, people would kill themselves, or nobody would watch, and who would want to play? What nonsense it would be. Or name it: golf, tennis, soccer, basketball, baseball. You got to have boundaries. You got to know when's the ball out of bounds. So they're a good thing. Know that in your heart as a parent, that the boundaries that you're setting are good. I hope they're good. Boundaries are good. Are yours good? And have you explain them to your kids?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to kind of imagine that, or even like bring your kids out and play a game without any boundaries, right? And they just kind of see the goofiness of it. It makes me want to kind of ask this last question, because in 8th grade smarts, we're called to kind of awaken the smarts of all of our kids. So as we're kind of guiding our kids to understand some of these realities of having resilience and building kind of the idea that they can be overcomers, what would be some ways that we could teach kind of I would say maybe like scripture informed approach to parenting to our kids, more than just kind of sitting down at the dinner table and talking about it, which is great for the kids that are naturally inclined to being word smart. Are there other ways that we can kind of awaken this in our kids that, scripture informed, living, and especially for us as parents, scripture informed parenting can be really dynamic, but sometimes we need to be conscious of the way that our kids are naturally wired. How can we kind of awaken that for them?
Yeah, that's really good. You're right that if somebody is word smart by God's design, then talking it through and sharing illustrations is going to be great. If you are raising somebody who has a lot of logic, smart brain cells, you have to give him or her permission to ask questions. And the kid is going to say, why do I have to do it that way? And ideally, you teach without frustration so that they know that you're a safe person. If somebody's picture smart, you let them draw what it will look like when they've done the task very well of emptying the dishwasher or sweeping out the garage with dad. So I think those kinds of ideas are great. And if people have not read 8th Grade Smarts, that book is full of hundreds of ideas. The only way that we can be scripture-informed people, scripture-informed parents, is to make sure that we've read the scripture and that we read it not just to get to know God, although that's primary, but to get into his son, obviously, Jesus Christ, but to get to know how he wants us to live our lives. So have we read James and John 1, 2, and 3, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and other, Galatians and Philippians and Colossians chapters and entire books of the Bible that are about us living a life that honors the Lord? I think if I were wanting to be a scripture-informed parent, I would read Proverbs, and I would read Proverbs regularly, and I would highlight and underline, verses about the wise one versus the foolish one. And I might even create an appendix of the verses that I can turn to on a regular basis. Maybe they're highlighted in a special color. Maybe I type them out or journal them so that I remember that under the authority of God, I need to parent in these ways. And knowing the advantages, right, Wayne? What are the advantages of scripture-informed parenting? For somebody who's listening, to take a few minutes to stop and ponder that. Why would I want to parent with scripture? Because I think if you wrap your mind around the benefits that are possible when you do that, you'll be more motivated to study and know scripture that is relevant to your role as a mom and dad.
As Dr. Kathy was talking, it reminded me of the Hall of Faith. It's found in Hebrews chapter 11. I'm going to jump ahead to verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over his head of his staff. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave direction concerning his bones. This little segment is kind of buried in the middle of this hall of faith. It's kind of fun to read through when you think about the dynamics of what all of the New Testament believers were facing. Their call was to remember the reality of what God did in amazing ways to lead Israel into the promised land. And the call in all of this is to trust God. So I think the words from Dr. Kathy and also these words from scripture can give us a bright light to give to our kids in some dark times. Maybe the best thing that we can give them is not maybe kind of hope or joy or peace or kind of this can-do spirit or this attitude that things will kind of work out in the end. But maybe it's to give them a faith that actually does shine and cut through dark times because we've seen it do that before. And when we put ourselves in the places of these men of faith, we realize that those were really dark times. And yet God's love and light and truth cut through even the darkest, thickest challenges that they face. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast in this daily segment, Face in the Dark. Tonight, Thursday, March 7th at 8 p.m., Dr. Kathy is going to go live. We're going to do this as part of our new online course series that we're running. Dr. Kathy is going to answer your questions, specifically related to a course that we're offering called Curb the Complaining. We want to invite you to join us in this live discussion and this live Q&A where you'll be able to either jump on video and ask Dr. Kathy a question digitally or by submitting your questions in the chat. We only have an hour for this, but we want to invite you to join us for this and consider signing up for our online course where Dr. Kathy is going to do this in rhythm. You can find out more information on our website, celebratekids.com. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender. I want to say thanks for listening, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.